We now know all but a few teams that will be at the 2026 Men's World Cup, and in a couple of weeks, the group stage will be drawn. Inevitably, when that happens, all the talk in the media will be on which one is the group of death. This phrase has become somewhat of a cliche in football, first being coined in 1970 by the Mexican press when defending champions England found themselves in a group with the eventual winners Brazil and 1962 finalists Czechoslovakia. They called it Grupo de la Muerte, and nearly 60 years on, we still love to dish out the phrase. The peak of groups of death was probably the 2014 World Cup, where 3 of the 8 groups were widely considered to be deserving of that title. There was Group B, which contained a rematch of the 2010 final between the Netherlands and Spain, as well as a Chile team in the midst of the greatest ever period, and soon-to-be Asian champions Australia. After the first game, it was pretty clear that Spain weren't the team that they once were, and in the end, the standings were pretty straightforward. But hey, at least Tim Cahill gave the Dutch a brief scare. Group D, meanwhile, had 3 former world champions in it, but Costa Rica managed to topple them all. In hindsight, both England and Italy were largely in transition at that time, but even still, they were both quite lethargic. And Group G boasted Germany, who won the whole thing, Ronaldo's Portugal, and Ghana in the United States, that at the time were actually good teams. Now, not so much. Needless to say, I don't like calling things a group of death, since I feel that it places all the focus on the top teams. The reality is that international football is gradually becoming more competitive across the globe. Many countries from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean are slowly but surely starting to hold their own against the established order. While I'm not a fan of FIFA's ideas to expand the World Cup to 64 teams, I do think that the 48-team pool next summer will give us a good idea of how the global balance of the sport is shaping up. This could lead to the tournament's 12 groups being quite a bit tighter than some may expect. So that got me thinking, what are all the possible ways that a group stage can finish? Just how close, and indeed how cursed, can the standings get? Let's find out. For this video, I needed a lot of data. I looked at every major international tournament in the men's and women's game since 3 points for a win was established, and noted down every 4-team group table. I just cared about the points. Goal difference is not too important for this analysis. I excluded tournaments with only 8 teams and therefore 2 groups, since those will be more competitive just by virtue of there being fewer teams in the competition. First up, let's look at all the possibilities for how a group can finish. A 4-team group has 6 matches, each of which has 2 outcomes. Either it ends in a draw, or there's a winner and a loser. It doesn't matter who exactly won, just that someone did. If a game is drawn, both teams earn 1 point, so 2 points are earned in total. If there's a winner, they earn 3 points and the loser earns nothing. So multiply that out by 6 games, and we find that groups can finish with anywhere between 12 and 18 points, and that corresponds directly with the number of games that ended in draws. We'll go through all 7 point totals one at a time, and along the way, count the number of theoretically possible groups we see, and how many actually happen in my dataset. The most extreme possible group is the 12-point group, in which every single game is a draw. Each team finishes on 3 points, 0 goal difference, and eternal boredom. So I don't think you'll be shocked to find out that in all the tournaments that I looked at, this never happened. But just how unlikely is this to happen? Among all the groups that I sampled, about 23.7% of matches ended in draws. Using this, we can work out that the odds of a 12-point group are about 1 in 5,640. This does assume that all 6 games in the group are independent, which is pretty obviously not true, but it's still a number that we can work with. I sampled a total of 353 4-team groups, so using a little something known as the binomial distribution, we can find out just how likely it is to have no 12-point groups in a sample that big. That gives a probability of just over 6%, so it shouldn't be too surprising that I didn't find one. Naturally, you might now ask, how many groups would I need to look at before the chance of at least one 12-team group showing up is more than 50%? 500? 1,000? 2,000? The answer is 3,916 groups. Something tells me we won't be seeing one of those anytime soon. Now interestingly, the last calculations that I did there assume that every group is independent, which you'd generally think is a fair assumption to make, and it is. However, there is one case where independence across groups in the same tournament can be violated, and that usually happens when the best third-place teams can qualify. Now let's try the 13-point group, 1 win and 5 draws. This gives a point distribution of 5-3-3-2, and deciding who finishes second would have to come down to the goals scored tiebreaker. You may recall seeing this group at Euro 2024, where England and Gareth Southgate's final tournament were relentlessly criticized for being boring, though at least they won a game, unlike Denmark. There was a far more extreme and in fact controversial example of the 13-point group at the 2015 African Cup of Nations. Mali went into the tournament off the back of bronze medals at both of the last two AFCONs, but they found themselves in a really tough group, with Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, and Guinea. The first four games all ended 1-1, and while Max Gordel had given the Ivorians win over Cameroon in their final game, Guinea and Mali were heading to yet another 1-1 draw. The two nations with very similar flags finished on 3 draws, 3 points, 3 goals scored, and 3 goals conceded. Guinea would advance to the quarterfinals at Mali's expense, but what was the tiebreaker, you ask? The drawing of lots. Yeah, I know. Before the tournament, it was decided to not use the fair play tiebreaker, though had that been used, Guinea would have gone through anyway, since they had far fewer yellow cards than Mali. Nonetheless, there was quite an outrage. Ever since, to this day, neither national team has made the Final Four of an AFCON or qualified for a World Cup, and both, especially Mali, have developed a bit of a reputation of being chokers. Who knows what would have happened had Mali's name been drawn on that fateful day. Moving along, let's look at the 14-point group. 2 wins and 4 draws. Unlike what we've seen so far, there are several different ways to pick the 4 games that will be draws. Firstly, you could have both games on 2 of the 3 match days being draws, and both games on the other match day having a winner. This gives rise to the 5-5-2-2 group. It's pretty unremarkable, but it has happened before, and we're going back to AFCON yet again, everyone's favorite international tournament, for an example of this in 2008. That was the only one in my dataset. All the other ways to pick the 4 draws will result in one team drawing all 3 games, but never more than one. Let's say that's Team D, so now one of the 3 games not involving Team D has to be a draw. Let's say that's B versus C, so that leaves 2 games involving Team A that have to have a winner. If A wins both, we get the 7-3-2-2 group. If A wins one, we get the 5-4-3-2 group, and if A loses both, we get the 5-5-3-1 group. The latter one in particular is notorious. Remember how Portugal won the Euro 2016 despite finishing 3rd in their group? They were in a 5-5-3-1. Iceland and Hungary had both claimed wins against an Austria side that had high expectations going in, while the draws would just keep on coming for Fernando Santos. Let's move on to the most intriguing category now, the 15-point group. 3 wins and 3 draws leads to lots of possibilities and some quite ridiculous tables. Let's start by fixing all 3 wins to Team A, which means that the games not involving Team A should all be draws. This gives rise to the absolutely ludicrous 9-2-2-2 group. Finishing second with just 2 points feels obscene, and it all comes down to who took the lightest defeat against the leader. Has this one happened in real life? Well, not on my dataset, and I don't think it's ever going to happen, but it would be really funny if it did. Similarly, if we fix all 3 losses to Team A, all the other teams will have 1 win and 2 draws, so we end up with the quite elusive 5-5-5-0 group. 5 points is already quite a rare total to hit in a 14 group stage, so 3 teams hitting it in 1 feels like a moment in history, and my dataset does have an example of this at Euro 2004. Swedish fans, you might want to look away here, because while you did win this group, Thomasson would end up haunting your national team quite a bit later. Finally, let's fix all 3 draws to Team A. Now things get a little bit complicated, because there are a couple different ways that you can assign the wins and losses to teams B, C, and D. One option is to have a dominant team, let's say B, that wins both of their games, and C versus D could go either way. The group that we get here is 7-4-3-1, which in my dataset occurred 5 times. The most recent high-profile example of this happened at the 2022 Women's Euros. A super talented France team were the favorites in their group, with Belgium, Iceland, and Italy all hoping to challenge for second place. France started as expected, thrashing the Italians 5-1 and getting the job done against Belgium. Iceland, meanwhile, drew their first 2 games. Going into the final day, the Belgium versus Italy match was a winner-take-all situation, whereas Iceland could sneak in if that game ended in a draw, and they got a positive result against the French, who rested some of their best players, given that they'd already qualified. Iceland's hope would soon be under threat, though, as Melvin Millard scored just seconds into the game. That was the only goal across both games in the first half, but it didn't take long in the second for teammate Dekani to put the Belgians ahead. So now, Iceland not only needed themselves to score, but the Italians too. As the clock wound down, nothing would come for Le Azzurre, so even with a 102nd minute penalty from... Okay, let's try. Takni Brynjarsdottir, maybe? But yeah, it wouldn't be enough, even with her penalty. And there you have it, the 7-4-3-1 group. The other situation that you can have is that teams B, C, and D all play a bit of rock, paper, scissors. B beats C beats D, and D beats B. The group that you get here is 4-4-4-3, and it is my single favorite one that we've covered so far. It requires a lot of particular things to happen, so you might think that it hasn't occurred in real life. Well, boy do I have news for you. It happened exactly once on my dataset, and for the third time in this video, we're going to AFCON. I love this tournament. It's 2010, and the World Cup is coming to Africa for the first time. But a few months before that, the continent's finest will do battle in Angola. Tunisia at the time are seen as a bit of an outsider. 6 years ago, they won their first and to date only AFCON, on home soil I might add, and they had qualified for each of the last 3 World Cups. But they're not at their best, having missed the big dance in South Africa, and later this year will hit their lowest FIFA rank ever. That said, they're still not to be sniffed at. Their group draw, however, is not the kindest. They have to come up against Samuel Eto'o and Alex Song's Cameroon, a Gabon team boasting a young but very promising Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and Zambia, whose coach Hervé Renard would eventually guide them to win the next AFCON in 2012 in stunning fashion. Tunisia played out 2 draws in their first 2 games, while Cameroon and Gabon both had a win each. Tunisia would need a win to qualify, but their opponents Cameroon could settle for a draw unless Zambia piled on the goals. And Zambia did indeed start on the front foot. Tunisia were also ahead at halftime, but Cameroon would be equal to whatever they did, including getting the second at just 1 minute after Tunisia went 2-1 up. In the midst of that chaos, Zambia doubled their lead and ultimately held on for the win to top the group. Bizarrely though, Gabon getting a late consolation also meant that all 4 teams finished on a 0 goal difference. The 4-4-4-3 group had happened, and Tunisia, despite going unbeaten, finished dead last. Later that summer, New Zealand would follow in Tunisia's footsteps, drawing all 3 games, but not qualifying, instead becoming one of the most overused football trivia questions ever. There are some other 15-point groups that are a little less interesting, so I'll put them up on screen with one real example of each. Among all the groups that I looked at, 32% of them finished on 16 points, another 34% finished on 17 points. You've probably seen all of these possible groups at least once before, and none of them really seem that remarkable. Of course, there is the 4x4, where every team wins, draws, and loses 1 game, but that did happen at Euro 2024, so it is still fresh in our minds. However, among all these groups, there is one in particular that I really like, the 6-4-4-3. This one is really fun, because it's one of those where not only do all the teams fail to go unbeaten, but also all the teams actually win at least 1 game. In fact, this group happened not once, not twice, but 3 times at the most recent World Cup in Qatar. In Group C, Argentina, who went on to win the whole thing, started off with quite a stunning result from Saudi Arabia in one of the upsets of the tournament. The Saudis unfortunately followed that up by losing the next 2 games, whereas Mexico and Poland played out a goalless draw with a heroic penalty save in one last World Cup moment for Memo Ochoa. Group E, meanwhile, was probably everyone's favorite group of the tournament, as it saw Japan upsetting both Germany and Spain, but because they failed to beat Costa Rica, the final day ended up being quite a frenzy of goals. Almost every goal that was scored in this group would alter the table in some way, but in the end we got this group. And finally, Group H, looking back at it, was probably pretty even matched from the very beginning. None of the 4 teams really stood out. Even Portugal, despite winning the group, had some hiccups. That Ghana game in particular, it was very nearly a draw, as Diego Costa almost spilled it. Uruguay, meanwhile, did not deliver, but at least they beat Ghana again, and both of them went out together. And finally, we have the 18-point groups. This is where every single game has a winner and loser. You might think that this is the most common, but it was actually much less common than the 60 and 17-point groups. Indeed, only 74 out of the groups that I sampled, or about 20%, had no draws in them. There are 4 different ways you can get an 18-point group. You could have what I call the ladder, which is when the top team has 9 points, the second place team has 6, third place team has 3, and the last place team has 0. This is like the most textbook group you can ever have. Next up is what I call the three-way, which is when the top 3 teams all beat each other twice, and the bottom team doesn't get a single win, so you end up with 6-6-6-0. It is pretty weird, but it's more common than you would think. Next up is rock, paper, scissors, which is when the top team wins all 3 games, but then the bottom 3 all go against each other, with a win and a loss each. And finally, we have the 6-6-3-3 group, which I don't have a good name for. It is pretty funny, and I'll tell you what else is funny, Germany 2018. That's what I'm calling this group. Sorry, Germans. I had to. So there we go. In total, there are 40 different ways for a 4-team single round robin group in football to finish. Here's the code I used to get all the groups. It's not the fanciest, but it works. What about groups of other sizes? The smallest group that you can describe in theory has 2 teams and 1 match. Either both teams draw or 1 wins. It's pretty easy to enumerate the possibilities for a 3-team group. There's the ladder, the rock, paper, scissors, all games draws, the top 2 drawing, the bottom 2 drawing, the middle double draw, and the top bottom draw. That's 7 in total. Obviously, we've just seen that there are 40 possibilities for 4-team groups, and my code does actually run in a pretty decent amount of time for 5-team groups. If you want to guess how many such groups there are, time's up is 355. And yeah, my code is way too inefficient for anything above 5. Now, I like to think that I know at least a couple things about math, but I couldn't work out anything the numbers 2, 7, 40, and 355 have in common. Or at least I was too lazy to do. So I typed the sequence into OEIS, and what do you know, it already exists. The football tournament numbers. Wow. So now let's look a little bit more at my data. Of the groups that I found, 36 out of the 40 possible groups were found at least once, with a couple notable absentees that we discussed earlier. The most common group by far was the ladder, the 9630, and after that it was the 7540, the 7640, and the 7531. But before we end, there is one last tournament that I want to look back at. The very first World Cup to have 3 points for a win, the 1994 World Cup in the United States, produced some of my favorite groups that we have ever seen. Groups B and C in this tournament both saw admirable fights, but none of those teams would qualify as the best third place teams because the other 4 groups in this tournament produced some beauty. Starting off with Group A, which contained the host as well as Haji's Romania, and ultimately it would be my favorite group, the 6-4-4-3 that we just discussed. Unfortunately though, this group was marred by the tragic killing of Andres Escobar after his own goal. Meanwhile, Group D would see Maradona thrown out of the tournament due to failing a drugs test, but it would be Bulgaria, inspired by Stoichkov, that would take this one by storm, and of course, Nigeria also putting in a lot of goals of their own. That led to a 3-way, 6-6-6-0, and Greece going out with -10 goal difference. Group E, meanwhile, saw Italy, Ireland, Mexico, and Norway, and it was a really tense one with no game being won by more than a goal, and ultimately all 4 teams ending on a win, a draw, and a loss each, so we got a 4-4-4-4 as well. And finally, in Group F, there was another 3-way, as Saudi Arabia would stun everyone by beating Belgium on the final day to advance alongside the Benelux neighbors. Morocco, though, despite losing all 3 games, only lost them all by 1 goal, and yeah, this group was pretty tense. But we got the 6-4-4-3, a 4x4, and 2 3-ways in the same tournament, which unfortunately meant that Russia and South Korea were packing their bags. Despite Russia's record of 3 points and a positive goal difference probably being enough to qualify as the best third place team in most other tournaments like this. But there we go, I remember my password, I made a video this year. Yeah, I know, I have not been focusing on this channel enough, and I don't expect any of you to subscribe or keep watching. This channel is going to have a very sporadic upload schedule. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you're new here, again, don't subscribe, don't expect regular videos. This isn't even me trying to dupe you. I do not upload on this channel very often. But when I do, I hope you enjoy it. And may the World Cup draw produce some classics.